Reading the Times for Sunday, February 9th, 2020. On Trump's to-do list, take back the suburbs, court black voters, expand the electoral map, and win. President Mr. Trump faces an unknown in Michael R. Bloomberg, a billionaire former New York City mayor running a general election strategy, who is spending so much money that Mr. Trump's advisors acknowledge that he cannot be ignored even if Mr. Bloomberg loses the Democratic nomination. Trump advisors are focused not just on the 3 states that elected Mr. Trump in 2016, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, but also the forever battleground of Florida and battleground states with competitive Senate races that could help the Democratic nominee in Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina. Mr. Sanders' aides, of course, see it very differently and believe that they would tear up Mr. Trump's 2016 electoral map by reclaiming working-class white voters in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, something some of Trump's advisors agree with. Where's Xi, China's leader, commands coronavirus fight from safe haven? How much the crisis might erode Mr. Xi's political standing remains to be seen, but it could weaken his position in the longer run as he prepares to take a likely 3rd term as Communist Party General Secretary in 2022. In 2018, Mr. Xi won approval to remove the constitutional limits on his term as the country's president, making his plan for another 5-year term seem all but certain. Mr. Xi did not appear on official broadcasts again for a week, until the highly scripted meeting on Wednesday with the authoritarian leader of Cambodia, Hun Sen. There's little evidence that Mr. Xi has given up power behind the scenes. Mr. Li, the premier informal charge of the leadership group for the crises, and other officials have said that they take their orders from Mr. Xi. The group is filled with officials who work closely under Mr. Xi, and its directives emphasize his authority. For thousands of years, Egypt controlled the Nile. A new dam threatens that. "We are not going to wait to die of thirst in Egypt," said Egypt's president at the time, Anwar Sadat. The Renaissance Dam spans the Blue Nile, the river's main tributary, which supplies most of Egypt's water. The Nile Museum, which opened in Aswan in 2016, emphasizes Egypt's ties with its African brothers. Inside a 3-story waterfall symbolizes the Nile's wending through 10 African countries before arriving in Egypt. The mystery of the painting in Gallery 634. Old court records indicate the painting, purchased by the Met in 1984, is likely the same one a Jewish art dealer, Siegfried Adam, left behind when he fled Germany as Hitler took power in 1933. The records, which recount the dealer's unsuccessful effort to reclaim his painting for more than a decade after the war, were discovered by a researcher and photographer, Joachim Peter, who has spent years studying the history of Heilbronn, the German city where Mr. Adam once lived, including the treatment of its Jews and the devastation from Allied bombing. In an appeal, Mr. Adam received another $7,000 from Mr. Sommer in a settlement over the house price, but the painting's ownership remained in dispute. The painting had been retitled by the time the Met purchased it, as experts came to believe it depicted not Tarquin and Lucretia, but the rape of Tamar, a daughter of King David, by her half-brother Amnon, and that Lesueur, not Vaux, had painted it. Wobbly after Iowa, Biden confronts a perilous moment. No amount of staff reshuffling may address Mr. Biden's more fundamental challenge, The setup of the primary calendar means that Mr. Biden is faltering before he has even a chance to compete in states where he has broader support, like Nevada and South Carolina later this month. Joe Biden is a fighter, said Andrew Bates, a spokesman for the Biden campaign, and Tom Steyer demonstrated with his repeated appeals at Friday's debates. Others in the race are aggressively seeking to make inroads with Mr. Biden's base, a task that could become easier if Mr. Biden finishes down the pack in the first 3 states. The scenic isle where the world's chaos comes home to roost. On the slope of a hill in Samos, on the Greek island, known for its ancient ruins, colorful fishing villages, and sweet muscat wine, sits a crammed migrant camp and sprawling tent city that many consider the most overcrowded and desperate refugee camp in Europe. Mr. Stansos, the mayor, said the Greek government promised him the camp in Samos would be closed, and won his grudging support for a new camp for 1,500 migrants, which many have characterized as a detention center about 3 miles inland. Herushieri Kapase Metinde, 29, from Congo, had earlier made the trip from Samos to the camp and celebrated by leading Syrian children in a song and dance. Sinn Féin surges in Irish elections, exit poll predicts. If the exit polls prove accurate, the vote boiled down to a 3-way tie in a 3-way race between Sinn Féin, Mr. Varadkar's Fine Gael party, and the leading opposition party, Fianna Fáil. Mr. Varadkar, who has led his party for only 2.5 years, is Ireland's first openly gay Prime Minister and the first with a non-European heritage. Mr. Varadkar said that if his party lost, he would seek to retain the leadership of Fine Gael as head of the opposition party, or as a junior partner in a coalition led by one of the other 2 largest parties. That was pretty good. To survive, Venezuela's leaders gives up decades of control over oil. Under Venezuelan law, the state-run oil company must be the principal stakeholder in all major oil projects. Now the only thing that matters is that oil continues to flow, said one partner at a joint oil venture, as he scanned his phone, viewing the state company's cargo offers. Despite the recent changes, there are many reasons to believe Venezuela's best days as an oil superpower are over, according to Amy Myers-Jeff, an oil expert at the Council on Foreign Relations, and other experts. Audit finds suspicious financial dealings in African soccer. The auditors found problems across the board, including with dispensation of millions of dollars of soccer development funds sent to the African soccer body by FIFA. The report also cited payments for gifts and in at least one instance for organizing a funeral. The report said that FIFA had remitted a total of $51 million to the African governing body from 2015 to 2018. And since then, about $24 million of that amount has been dispersed by African soccer officials. The details revealed in the audit are likely to lead to a flurry of new cases for FIFA's ethics department, which has yet to deal with a number of long-standing investigations, including one for Mr. Ahmed. The ethics complaint at FIFA accuses him of misusing hundreds of thousands of dollars of federation money to make $20,000 payments in the private bank accounts of some African soccer leaders, to purchase a fleet of cars for his use in Madagascar, and to enter into questionable contractual agreements, including the one with Tactical Shield. They fight suicide bombers, but can Afghan police fight crime? In a sign of how distrusted and depleted the regular police forces have become, the ministry had to draw heavily on the elite special forces, from the police chiefs of half the country's 34 provinces up to the country's top cop. All were replaced with young special forces officers who are more used to leading commandos in raids in enemy territory than the patient work of community policing. Omid Nizami, whom the police described as a gangster stuck in a long, bloody feud with a relative, has been shot dead. The relative, a former police general named Zemarai Paikan, has been on the run. 2 American soldiers killed in shootout with Afghan forces. A shootout between Afghan and American soldiers during joint operations in eastern Afghanistan on Saturday resulted in fatalities on both sides, Afghan and American officials said. Details on the incident in Nangarhar province, where American special forces were helping Afghan commandos and the Afghan army clear an area threatened by the Taliban, were scarce. The American military command in Afghanistan confirmed that a joint American and Afghan force had come under direct fire in Nangarhar without providing details. In coronavirus, China weighs benefits of buffalo horn and other remedies. Doctors are conducting clinical trials to test the efficacy of traditional Chinese medicine in Wuhan, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, said Dr. Cheng, the expert at Yale, who is also chairman of the Consortium for the Globalization of Chinese Medicine, a group of academics in the field. The Chinese people have experienced these sort of plagues many times in our thousands of years of history. If the traditional Chinese medicines was not so effective, the Chinese people would already be destroyed. Chen Shi, an assistant professor of health policy and economics at the Yale School of Public Health, urged the Chinese news media to be more careful in its reporting, saying that the potential for traditional Chinese medicine to inhibit the virus is not equivalent to a form of prevention of treatment. Innocent but implicated. Wuhan native is in limbo during epidemic. The 24-year-old native of Wuhan, China, has gone to celebrate the holiday with her family on the southern island of Hainan. After an initial visit by local officials in Hainan to take the family member's temperature, they began a self-imposed quarantine for 14 days. Many people from Wuhan, the epicenter of the new coronavirus outbreak, have fared worse under a countrywide campaign to identify and isolate anyone who has recently been to the city. First American dies of coronavirus, raising questions about U.S. response. While Chinese officials have publicly touted the importance of international cooperation to combat the virus, doubts have also arisen in recent days about China's willingness to accept a helping hand, particularly from the United States. Chinese officials have criticized the United States both for evacuating Americans from China and for imposing travel curbs, saying that such moves could spread panic. Mr. Trump praised China's handling of the crisis on a phone call with China's top leader, Xi Jinping, on Friday. Soldier kills 29 in Thailand shooting spree and dies in a standoff. A soldier armed with an assault rifle went on a shooting rampage at a military base and a shopping mall on Saturday, killing several people and broadcasting himself on Facebook Live, according to police and local news reports. The area around the mall in Korat had been cordoned off, and local news outlets reported that many people were trapped inside the mall as the siege continued. The culprit is still in Terminal 21 Korat Mall and is still actively shooting, causing fires in the mall. People in the nearby area should be careful. Antarctica set record high temperature, 64.9 degrees. The station had been recording temperatures since 1961. The temperature at Esperanza, where it's summer, was comparable with the weather in Los Angeles and Huntsville, Alabama, where the high temperatures were 64 on Thursday, according to the National Weather Service. Temperature on the continent ranged on average from 14 degrees Fahrenheit on the Antarctic coast to minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit at the high elevations of the interior, the meteorologist organization said. The lower 48 states had average temperatures of 35.5 degrees, and they all saw above to much above average temperatures last month, it said. French ice sports chief resigns amid sexual abuse scandal. The president of French Federation of Ice Sports, Didier Gallegouar, said on Saturday he had resigned after allegations of sexual abuse of underage figure skaters by their coaches that have prompted a broader reckoning across other sports in France. On Monday, reacting to the claims of French sports minister Roxana Maraschino called for Mr. Galacchio to resign, saying he cannot absolve himself of his moral and personal responsibility. An inquiry in 2000 prompted the sports ministry to remove Mr. Bayer from his technical role at the federation, but he remains a coach at club level and also held an executive position at the federation until 2018. In order to resign, I would have to be at fault, Mr. Galacchio said. Jeff Sessions was Trump before Trump. Will Alabama voters remember? At the Huntsville Forum, his campaign literature fanned out across the table declared, "We can trust Bradley to stand with President Trump." He managed to insert Mr. Trump's name into almost every answer he gave that night, starting with his introduction to the crowd. "I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative," he said, with the exception of a few influential conservatives, including Fox News' Tucker Carlson, who, in an interview last year with Huntsville radio host Jeff Poore, said the Sessions was Trump long before Trump, and Laura Ingraham, who in 2014 said Mr. Sessions should be president. Most Republicans seem to have conveniently forgotten Mr. Sessions' contributions to Trumpism. Though Mr. Sessions said he has not spoken to the president since he left the Justice Department over a year ago, preserving the themes of the 2016 Trump campaign inside a party that was often hostile to them is a major reason why he wants to be in the Senate. What it was like to work for Andrew Yang. Mr. Yang agreed and began running it in 2006 at the age of 30. "I was charged up and ready to make a mark," Mr. Yang wrote in his first book. Many of Mr. Yang's former employees said that he worked extremely hard alongside them, and in some cases, Mr. Yang and the people he worked with became personal friends. Ronit Perlman, who was one of Manhattan Prep's first employees, became part of Mr. Yang's leadership team there, said that while watching Mr. Yang on the trail, she has been struck by his genuine desire to pitch ideas that are centered around fixing the world. Biden slashes into Buttigieg. The guy's not a Barack Obama. Tensions in the Democratic presidential primary reached new heights on Saturday as former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and former Mayor Pete Buttigieg clashed over experience in their most pointed and confrontation to date, while Senator Bernie Sanders lashed both Mr. Buttigieg and another opponent, Michael R. Bloomberg, on the final weekend before the New Hampshire primary, with Mr. Sanders and Mr. Buttigieg vying for the lead in polls of New Hampshire voters. Mr. Biden, under growing pressure to revive his campaign after a fourth-place finish in Iowa, the crossfire signaled that the Democratic contest had reached a new, more contentious phase, after the candidates spent much of the last year aiming their criticism at President Trump. Mr. Biden's aides went even further than the candidate in attempting to slow the momentum of Mr. Biden, who has steadily gained strength in New Hampshire polls, after he and Mr. Sanders both finished at the top in Iowa. The Biden campaign released a biting web ad comparing Mr. Buttigieg's experience as a former mayor. Pete Buttigieg revitalized the sidewalks of downtown South Bend by laying out decorative brick to Mr. Biden's tenure in a White House and Senate. What? Post-impeachment, a key Republican suburban area rallies around Trump. Charlie Sykes, the former editor at Right, Wisconsin, who broke with the Republican Party over Mr. Trump, said that the question was not whether Mr. Trump would win in Waukesha County, but by how much. Every once in a while, I get an email from someone who says, "Thank goodness you're still criticizing Trump for his behavior," said Mr. Wigderson, who airs views critical of Mr. Trump on his website. Jeremy Carpenter, 31, who works for a Republican state lawmaker, said he was so turned off by Mr. Trump, at first he voted for Evan McMullen, an independent, in 2016. He said he's still not a fan of Mr. Trump's style, but he gradually decided that many of his policies, his nomination of conservative judges, his support of anti-abortion movement, his stance on trade and foreign policy outweigh the negatives. Tech companies detect a surge in online videos of child sexual abuse. A single report usually includes multiple photos and videos, for example, when the material is found in someone's email account, and so the overall growth in reported imagery may signal those that are sharing it and sharing it in larger volumes, said Mr. Sheehan of the National Center. The continued growth in reported images from Facebook is sure to increase pressure on the company, which has been generally lauded for finding and reporting the content, but announced last year that it intended to encrypt its Messenger app. Encryption would make it much more difficult to detect the illegal imagery on Messenger, which is also the largest source of reported material in 2018. In September, the Times reported that the number of reports to the National Center have grown exponentially, and that the federal response was lacking despite a 2008 law meant to address what it then called an epidemic. Throughout the country, law enforcement groups charged with investigating the crimes have been overwhelmed. 16-year-old pleads guilty to murder in Colorado school shooting. The student, Alec McKinney, also pleaded guilty in Douglas County District Court to 16 other counts in the attack, which the prosecutors say he carried out with another student, Devin Erickson, 19, at the STEM School Highlands Ranch on May 7, 2019. The shooting in an English class that was watching The Princess Bride 3 days before the last day of school killed Kendra Castillo, 18, a gentle teenager fascinated by cars and engineering, whose classmates said lunged to try to stop the attack. Mr. McKinney said he wanted students at the school to experience bad things and having to suffer the trauma like he had to suffer in his life, according to an affidavit from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Mr. McKinney, whose legal name is Maya McKinney, said he targeted several students who always made fun of him, hated him, called him names, and said he was disgusting for trying to be a guy, the affidavit states. Bronx NYPD shooting. 2 officers wounded in targeted attack. The shooting at the station house, which serves the Hunts Point neighborhood, occurred about 12 hours after an attack Saturday night on police officers who were sitting in a marked patrol vehicle. Video of the attack that appeared on social media show a man entering the station house, shooting a gun, and then voluntarily laying on the ground and sliding his weapon to police officers, who then apprehend him. The commissioner said the unprovoked shooting evoked memories of other attacks on police over the years, including the killings of 2 Brooklyn officers, Wenjian Liu and Rafael Ramos. Republican senators tried to stop Trump from firing impeachment witnesses. Republicans considered some of Colonel Vindman's comments during his testimony overtly political and, in any case, believed it was untenable for him to remain on the staff of a president with whom he broke so publicly. Mr. Trump offered no explanation on why Colonel Vindman's twin brother, Yevgeny Vindman, who is also an Army lieutenant colonel and who worked as a lawyer on the National Security Council staff, was fired and escorted out of the White House complex at the same time, even though he did not participate in House hearings. Mr. Sondland, who is deeply involved in the effort to pressure Ukraine to testify that we followed presidential orders and everyone was in the loop. Colonel Vindman, who was on Mr. Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukraine president, testified it was improper for the president to coerce a foreign country to investigate political opponents. They both won every race so far and want to win in New Hampshire. With a diminished former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., who finished 4th in Iowa, entering Friday's debates under the most scrutiny, both Ms. Warren and Ms. Klobuchar also arrived facing significant pressure. The Working Families Party, the progressive group that has endorsed Ms. Warren, sent an email Saturday noting that Ms. Warren had absolutely killed it at the debate, despite getting 20% less speaking time than other leading male candidates on stage, including Joe Biden, whom it noted she defeated in Iowa. During the debate, the Warren campaign said it had the most donations processing simultaneously than it ever had, though it declined to release any actual fundraising figures. Lizzie Williamson, a 31-year-old who drove up from northeastern Massachusetts to knock on doors for Miss Warren, had watched the debate and was frustrated with how little speaking time Miss Warren received. This will come back to haunt Trump and his enablers. While the Senate may emerge from the process weakened, the American people on the whole emerged from it strengthened by a sharp sense of what's right and what's wrong for an American president, of what it means for a political party to show moral courage, of what it looks like when dedicated public servants speak truth, no matter the consequences, and of the importance of whistleblowers for ensuring accountability. That's huge. For all that divides America today, this is the dominant consensus on what it means to abuse public office and distort American democracy. President Trump may remain in office for now, but he now serves an American people that's stronger for the journey our country has just taken. The Donald Trump theory of Bernie Sanders. There's a theory of the case, fight fury with fury, one messiah with another, that I hear frequently. Yes, Sanders cements his front-runner status in the Democratic primary, and as Democrats desperate to defeat Trump wrestle with the wisdom or folly of giving Sanders that assignment. Sanders is a populist of the left as surely as Trump is a populist of the right, with a familiar distaste for compromise and a comparable appeal to Americans outraged or disgusted by politics as usual and by the usual politicians, while Trump claims leadership of a movement likes of which the world has never seen. Sanders spearheads a revolution to be brought about by the most unprecedented campaign in modern history of this country. And aspects of his pitch on trade, for example, resonate with the blue-collar workers in the Rust Belt, who were important to Trump's re-election. Should we leave life in China under coronavirus lockdown? These precautions feel like role play, but I still dutifully wash my hand every time I walk through the door, humming the alphabet song under my breath. Should we leave? My husband has posed the question to me several times now, always casually in a level voice, carefully disguising his feelings. Everyone in China knows better than to take what the Communist Party mouthpieces tell us at face value. But when 1.4 billion lives are at stake, is it still possible to live with the half-truths? The age of decadence. What if the feeling of acceleration is an illusion conjured by our expectations of perpetual progress and exaggerated by the distorted filter of the internet? What if we, or at least we in the developed world, in America and Europe and the Pacific Rim, really inhabit an area which repetition is more the norm than invention, in which stalemate rather than revolution stamps our politics, in which the sclerosis afflicts public institutions and private life alike, in which new development in science, new exploratory projects consistently underdeliver? What if the meltdown at the Iowa caucuses, an antique system undone by pseudo-innovation and incompetence, was much more emblematic of our age than any great catastrophe or breakthrough? In 2017, a group of economists published a paper asking, Are ideas getting harder to find? The answer was a clear yes. We present the wide range of evidence from various industries, products, and firms showing that research efforts is rising substantially while research productivity is declining sharply. In his 2011 book, The Great Stagnation, Tyler Cowen cited an analysis from Pentagon physicist Jonathan Hubner, who modeled an innovations to population ratio for the last 600 years. It shows a slowly ascending arc through the late 19th century, with major inventions were rather easy to conceive and adopt, and a steepening decline ever since, as rich countries spend more and more on research to diminishing returns. We used to travel faster, build bigger, live longer. Now we communicate faster, chatter more, snap more selfies. I don't want to be the strong female lead. It's challenging for writers to imagine a world in which such free woman can exist without brutal consequences. We are annihilating the feminine as a force wherever it resides, in women, in men, of the natural world. These women use the tenets of genre to reveal the injustices of the present and imagine our evolution. What's so great about fake Roman temples? Modern federal buildings rightly reflect the diversity of this great nation, from the wavy blue glass of the federal courthouse in Miami to the salvaged timber planks in a federal office building in Seattle, to the vertiginous white facade of a courthouse annex in Salt Lake City. Those three buildings are among the products of a 30-year-old federal program, little known but highly successful, that encourages excellence in the design of a major federal building. A proposed executive order titled Make Federal Buildings Beautiful Again would shift the style of future federal buildings back to the past. The order is quite clear about the definition of beauty and the necessary solution to the crises. In National Federal Capital Region and for all federal courthouses, the classical architectural style shall be the preferred and default style. In other words, federal buildings, most of all federal courthouses, should resemble Roman temples as closely as possible, although presumably without any statues of false gods in the lobby. How politics plays out in textbooks. 2 States, 8 Textbooks, 2 American Stories by Dana Goldstein. A comparison of textbooks used in Texas and California suggests these materials are not only shaded by politics, but also helping to shape a generation of future voters. A comparison of Texas and California science textbooks might produce more surprising results than Dana Goldstein's fascinating but predictable comparison of history textbooks. 2 States, 8 Textbooks, 2 American Stories offers a clear, balanced explanation of the power both California and Texas wields over the content of their textbooks. The Dawn Strikes Back. Trump hollowed out the hollowed, apprenticing one of Washington's most august traditions on Tuesday night, showing in the State of the Union how he has figured out how to use the levers of presidency to amplify his flair for the dramatic. The acquittal put an exclamation point on 2 facts. Trump has subsumed the Republican Party, except for the sole Republican lawmaker whose base will not kill him if he voted to throw the president out of office. Alexander Vindman, the national security official who testified against Trump in the impeachment hearings, and his twin brother were perp-walked out of the White House complex on Friday. The hidden depression Trump isn't helping. Important new research finds that 20 million Americans, particularly those with low levels of education, describe all 30 of the last 30 days as bad mental health days. 1/3 of Americans say they have been in pain often or very often in the last 4 weeks. In effect, we have a bifurcated economy marked by prosperity for millions of Americans and by a social Great Depression for millions of others. The Republican Party has embraced its worst self. If Republicans in Washington were enthusiastic about Citizens United, they were silent in 2013 after a Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County versus Holder, where the same Republican-appointed majority gutted a critical section of a 1965 Voting Rights Act, clearing the way for new restrictions on voting. Neither McConnell nor the House Speaker, John Boehner, had any comment in the wake of the decision, despite the fact that they voted to reauthorize the Voting Act 7 years earlier under President George W. Bush. Since Shelby, Republican lawmakers in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia have openly suppressed the vote with vote purges, strict ID laws, and cuts to voting infrastructure. I had a gloriously wild childhood. That's why I wrote How to Train Your Dragon. I was 9 years old, hanging on as tightly as I could to my father's legs as he dangled over the edge of a gigantic sea cliff on a tiny island off the west coast of Scotland. While we were staying on the island, we had no way of contacting the outside world. In the evenings, my father told me and my siblings tales of the Vikings who invaded the island 1,200 years before, of the quarrelsome ancient British tribes who fought one another, and of dragons who were supposed to live in the caves in the cliffs on the island. When white women wanted a monument to black mammies. The fight over a proposed monument to black mammies exposes the lie of those who describe Confederate monuments as innocuous celebrations of Southern heritage. In addition to the plaques, many formal monuments to faithful slaves were proposed. 3 were built, including The Faithful Slave Monument at Fort Mills, SC in 1895, the United Daughters of the Confederacy's most successful attempt at memorializing slavery at the national level, happened during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, who institutionalized segregation in the federal government, cutting to the heart of the myth of the non-problematic love whites imagined they had given to and received from enslaved women. Terrell condemned these monuments as actively rewriting the history of slavery. Deer population meets its match. Women who hunt. In New York State, as in the rest of the country, the number of first-time adult male hunters declined by over 30% over the last 15 years, while the number of women who hunt for the first time increased at roughly the same rate. Like most of the hunters she knows, she hunts for food and particularly enjoys introducing friends to grilled venison tenderloin, a revelation to people outside of local hunting cultures who think deer are mainly taken for trophies. Deer hunting is often a solo activity, but women who hunt find one another. Yeah. Who really killed Malcolm X? Some new evidence comes from a 6-part documentary called Who Killed Malcolm X?, streaming on Netflix February 7th, which posits that 2 of the men convicted could not have been at the scene that day. Mr. Muhammad published Mr. Shabaz's name and photograph on his blog in 2010, then shared his research with Manning Marable, who is working on a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. Mr. Muhammad believes that the other 3 men named in Mr. Hayer's affidavit are dead. After the book came out, Alvin Sykes, a Kansas City activist who helped persuade the FBI and Justice Department to create a cold case unit for civil rights-era killings, lobbied federal prosecutors to reinvestigate Malcolm's murder. Carl Evans, author of The Judas Factor, The Plot to Kill Malcolm X, cites film footage that he said shows Mr. Aziz at the Audubon and dismissed Mr. Muhammad's research as unreliable. How a champion of female filmmakers spends her Sundays. Watching the Academy Awards is always a difficult experience, said Melissa Silverstein, the founder and publisher of Women and Hollywood, an online initiative that pushes for gender diversity and inclusion in the movie industry. My house is very old, so a lot of things need to be WD-40'd. I'll inevitably get on the computer. I might grab some lunch at Bergen Bagels, and then sometimes I go over to BAM, watch a movie because it's really close, and they have great movies. How an education visionary got canceled. After Mr. Wilson's termination, the board also lost its only African-American member at the time. Margaret Anadou, who runs the Urban Investment Group at Goldman Sachs, resigned in protest at how Mr. Wilson had been treated. A graduate of Harvard, Mr. Wilson is the son of 2 former Harvard professors. One of them, E. Bright Wilson, was described in obituaries as one of the most distinguished physical scientists of the 20th century. Another Wilson son won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1982. As it happened, Stephen Wilson was exacting about everything. When she leaned onto me a 3rd time, I gave her my shoulder. Are you picking up girls in the park again? He said. I grabbed the detergent and laundry cart, piled 3 heavy laundry bags into a cart, and wheeled it all out the front door on the way to the laundry room in my building's basement. How about we flip for using the laundry cart, he said. No idea what I have no idea what the whole article is about. An algorithm that grants freedom or takes it away. In San Jose, California, where an algorithm is used during arraignment hearings, an organization called Silicon Valley Debug interviews the families of each defendant, takes this personal information to each hearing, and shares it with the defenders as a kind of counterbalance to algorithms. In this closely watched case, which is seen as setting a precedent in Europe about government use of predictive algorithms, the court said that the welfare program lacked privacy safeguards and that the government was inadequately transparent about how it worked. Dr. Burke, the Penn professor who designed the algorithm used by the Philadelphia Probation Department, said controversy would fade as algorithms became more widely used. Maybe information actually doesn't want to be free. The information achieved profitability. The information achieved profitability in 2016, Miss Lesson said 3 years after she left the Wall Street Journal to start it. Miss Lesson said she tapped her own bank account using less than $1 million to start the information and continues to own and control it wholly. As a female entrepreneur, Miss Lesson felt the information work was deeply personal, especially as several men in the industry who had heard the piece was in the works contacted her to suggest the claims were overblown. Social Security. Where do the 2020 candidates stand? For the Democrats support increasing Social Security benefits for caregivers, recognizing that caregiving duties can depress benefits by cutting into working hours and wages. The current survivor benefits is equal to 100% of the deceased spouse benefits, but that doesn't help much in the case where both spouses had similar wage histories and benefits. A Pew Research Center study released last March found widespread worry among today's workers about the program's future. 83% expected benefit cuts by the time they retire, and 42% did not expect to receive any benefits in retirement. And that has been Reading the Times for Sunday. It's February 9th, and the year, what's the year? 2020!